Welcome to the 536th Board Meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I'd like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. On my far left is Carmen Ramirez of Atwater. Sitting between Carmen and myself is John Constantino of Grass Valley. And on my right is Denise Cadera of Allensworth. Bob Schneider will be joining us shortly. He called me. They had a wreck, I think, on 80. And he's caught up in traffic, but he'll be here shortly. Also in attendance, and my name is Carl Longley of Fresno. State Board member Tam Dudek is in the audience with us today, as she typically is. And I might point out that this board meeting is being webcast to the public, so if you smile, your people will be able to see that you're happy today. I'll now introduce the executive officer who will introduce her staff.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Longley, members of the board. Across the room from me, to my far left, is first Brett Braidman with our staff manager in our Sacramento office, and next to Brett is Andrew Altavogt, assistant executive officer in the Sacramento office, and next to Andrew is Andrew Derringer, the staff counsel for the board. To my far left is Karen Lanfranchi Rizzardi, executive assistant for the board. And next to Karen is Adam Lapitz, our assistant executive officer in the Sacramento office. And sitting right next to me is Patrick Palupa, senior staff counsel for the board. In the audience, we have Clint Snyder, our AEO, Assistant Executive Officer in the Redding office, and Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office. We have Linda Bracamani, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office. We also have David Coop sitting in the back, Senior Staff Counsel, used to be for this board, but now for Region 4, and here on our business as well today. We also have a number of staff in the audience.
Thank you very much. John, could you lead us in the pledge, please?
Please stand. Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item on our agenda are the minutes of the December 4th and 5th, 2014 board meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
I would so move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have to do a roll call on this?
Every item the board approves from here on out has to be
Every
roll call.
item.
So,
Okay.
Patrick, I missed the second day of the last meeting. If I abstain, do we have enough to carry the vote?
If you abstain, we still have enough to carry the vote.
Okay.
You essentially just, if the majority carries the vote, we still have it.
Call the roll, please.
Ms. Ramirez? Yes. Ms. Cadara? Yes. Mr. Costantino?
Abstain.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. The meeting procedures of the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board are something that we repeat each time that we have a meeting, simply because they're so important to the way we conduct our meeting. And in order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with the summary agenda and are available here at the staff table. And upon request, you can receive copies also. They're also posted on the board's website and are summarized on the computer screens during breaks. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Lanfranchi Rizzardi, our administrative assistant. Take us to item 3 on the agenda, board member communications. Carmen, do you have anything?
I do have something, but I will do it tomorrow, please.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, Denise will do tomorrow too. I'll take a little bit of time so Bob can get a seat. 11 December, I visited the Corlo Engineer Fixed Bid Biological process located at, they have a pilot process running at Delano. It looks like the city of Delano is going to go ahead and put in a full-scale plant. It's a very interesting process. It's one that we're finding funding for to try it on very small communities. The question is whether or not that process is subject to on and off operations as you have on very small communities. They had an incident where they had to take the process down for 5 or 6 weeks at Delano, and lo and behold, the bugs were there and ready to go. They came back online. It's, I think this is one of the tools that's going to be in our toolbox as we go down the road to address the issues with nitrate. The nice thing about it is it also can changes Chrome 6 to Chrome 3, so that's also a real positive. On 19th of December, I met with Lester Snow, Craig Schmidt, Kathy Vatilla, and David Zaldowski regarding California water issues. On the 5th of Jan, I participated in the monthly Water Board's Chairs meeting. And on the 6th of Jan, together with Pamela and leadership to the Alta Water District and KRCD, reviewed plans for a regional surface water treatment plant to provide potable water to DACs within the service area. On 20 Jan, attended a state board meeting for the CV salts item at the state board. Of note there was $2 million from the cleanup and abatement account that went to the UCLA team to put their process in place. And this process, then they're going to be evaluating whether or not they can, with that process, if they can serve distributed communities. They have some very good technology insofar as remote operation. I think that that's going to be an interesting one to watch. On the 26th of Jan, I participated in a Healthy Soils meeting by telephone, and this meeting was held in the governor's office. Adam Laputz was there, and you're going to be seeing more about the Healthy Soils initiative. I believe we're going to have an information item on the April meeting. Am I correct?
On healthy soils?
Yes.
We weren't planning on it, but our April agenda is getting to be, you'll be there till midnight, it seems, right now.
Well,
We're in
it
Fresno.
ties to all of our programs, and we should be aware of it. In fact, that's
We will fit it in somehow, Dr. Longley.
that's our now departed board member, Jenny Lester Moffett. That's one of her prime responsibilities.
Now departed.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you should clarify that.
She has left us. She hasn't left the world. But she's that's one of her primary issues. It's a very important program. And so that's my report. I would like to report, though, on the mention that the regional board chairs conference call that they have monthly. The big point of discussion, there's been two items that have been big lately, and one of them has been putting together the next face-to-face meeting of the regional board chairs, which is in April, and putting together the next WQCC. Another item that's been big lately is the EO pay, and I think the AEO pay the Assistant Executive Officer pay has to be on the table also. These pay schedules have grown at random without reference to other pay schedules, and there's a tremendous amount of discrepancies. It will be on the April 20th meeting agenda, and so it's one that a lot of the chairs have some real concern about. With that said, Bob, do you want to report today or tomorrow?
Carl, I'll report tomorrow if you have a couple things.
Sure.
And Dr. Longley, since I'm actually ready now.
So go
If
ahead.
no one else is going to go on, I only have one item. on January 20th, 2015, the California Hispanic Chamber of Commerce hosted me and other appointees, California state appointees, to a reception with the governor here in Sacramento. There was no specific topics related to this board discussed, but I wanted to disclose it anyways.
Thank you very much. And do we have any cards for the public forum? Good. We'll move on then. Item number 5, the Executive Officer's Report.
So Dr. Longley, there's a couple of things. We sent some addendums to the report this week. I don't know. One was on the Healthy Soils Initiative, and the other on an update on the Clifton Court Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. So I don't know if there are any other items in the EO report or these addendums that you wanted to speak about. We also had an issue, and it's written up in the EO report, not an issue. We had a recent listening session for the grazing activities that's been of keen interest to a lot of people lately. And between the last board meeting and this board meeting, there was a public session held in Reading, and staff's prepared to speak a little bit to that if you'd like to hear an update on what happened at we didn't have time to get it into the EO report on the listening session.
It's an important program. Take the update.
Pardon me?
We'll take the update.
Okay. Sue McConnell will give you the update.
Carl, if I could just backtrack, I did attend in the end of January, I think it was the 28th, the Firescape Mendocino planning process with stakeholder process, and I'd asked Clint to have somebody from the water board there, and we were represented, and thank you for that.
So Dr. Longley, once Sue is complete and there aren't any other questions on the actual report, I do have some staff awards to make.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, Dr. Longley, members of the board. I'm Sue McConnell, and I manage the Non-Point Source program, and I'm here to just give you a quick update on the statewide grazing effort and answer your questions. So the Grazing Regulatory Action Project was initiated by the Management Coordinating Committee, which is the executive management for the water boards. And the goal for this effort is to more efficiently address listings of impaired water bodies and to promote statewide consistency. Grazing is, of course, important for our region. We have over half of the rangelands in the state of California within the Central Valley region. That's about 40 million acres. Half of that is in private lands, half of it is in public. That's Forest Service and BLM. And we also have, I think, about 1.3 million acres in irrigated pastures that's covered by our Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. So it's an important issue for us, and we're definitely tracking it. I want to just absolutely stress that no decisions have been made on this effort, that we are very much in the listening phase of the process. We are gathering information, as you see in our executive officer report item. There have been a number of focused listening sessions. There have been more public regional meetings, but we are just gathering information to develop an initial proposal, which we will then bring back to the stakeholders. More specifically, back in November of last year, we did have 4 focused listening sessions. That was with the ranching and related industries, with the environmental and conservation entities, with local and governmental agencies, and then finally with academia. There was a meeting scheduled with the tribes, but that was canceled because of the storm of the century, and we will be rescheduling that meeting. And then last month, we did have public regional meetings in 3 locations, in San Luis Obispo, up in Reading, and then in Bishop, where we discussed what we heard from the focused listening sessions, and then we solicited more input. And from those meetings, what came out of those meetings was a request for additional meetings. And so what the work group is now considering is when we're going to have those additional meetings. Are we going to have it now, or are we going to wait until we develop an initial proposal? Some of the other things we heard at the meetings were concerns about the need for this new regulatory process. What is the need? Where is the linkage between the water quality impacts and the 303D list? And so in Bishop last week, Jonathan Bishop committed to developing a document that will provide the background information for the impairments. The stakeholders also expressed concern about the costs, the potential costs of this program, how it might impact ranchers. Absolutely, that's something we're going to look at. There was concern expressed about overlapping regulations, and so in response to that, our work group met with the other water board programs to talk about potential overlap and to definitely, talk about strategies for avoiding that overlap. There are concerns expressed about the process, about transparency and the science behind what we're doing. And so we're developing a science portal that is going to allow people to provide information to the work group to consider as a part of this process. There's a lot of concern about the fact that, we might not be looking at the benefits of grazing. And so, in fact, our region is taking the lead on developing a fact sheet to document all of the benefits that we know of associated with grazing, because, concerns were raised about that our effort might cause unintended consequences, that, we might affect grasslands and vernal pools and open space, and that there would be a loss of habitat that might come out of it. And so actually just this week, members of the grazing work group attended a grazing symposium that talked about all of these issues, as well as issues around coordination with other entities associated with grazing. So the last two concerns that we heard from the stakeholders that there's so many, but in terms of major concerns, there are concerns about the appropriateness of a statewide approach. Does it make sense in light of the differences between the different regional boards, especially given that some regional boards have a number of listings and some of us have more limited listings, and some of the regional boards have no listings. And then finally, stakeholders really wanted us to look at past efforts. As a part of the non-point source effort, we have worked with grazing and ranchers, and there was a range plan effort developed a decade ago. They wanted to make sure we don't lose track of that information, as well as information that we gained from the Forest Service waiver update process. So definitely, some of the members of the work group are the same folks who worked on those efforts, and we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We absolutely aware of them and want to use that information. So finally, I think there are some questions about the Range Management Advisory Committee, RMAC. Our work group did meet with RMAC prior to the focus listening sessions because they requested a meeting with us. We continue to coordinate with them. They raised some concerns about, regulating grazing, and they offer to help us with coordination, and so we're taking them up on that.
What group was that?
So, I'm sorry, so RMAC is I want to make sure I get this right, Range Management Agency Advisory Committee, and they're a subcommittee of the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, at our region, we're working on the benefits of grazing. That fact sheet, we're looking at the background information around our impairments. And then, we're working to compile the information that we've gotten from all of the various different listening sessions. And then we'll be working with the work group to develop an initial proposal to bring back out to the stakeholders. So that's where we're at. Do you have any questions?
Well, yes. To what degree has the Forest Service and VLM been party to these discussions?
So we have reached out to them. They did attend, I think the Forest Service was at, I have to go back and check, and I'm pretty sure the Forest Service was there. We have Forest Service representatives at the governmental entities discussion. I don't recall the Bureau of Land Management. I think we've reached out to them individually.
Right.
But
their past practices, and I'm not current on this, but their past practices was they let contracts, individuals bid on them to be able to graze cattle on forest lands. And they didn't take into account that you have different climate years. And I have seen meadows and other grazing areas in the backcountry completely trampled in dry years. So, those lands will only accept what nature gives them, so to speak, in the form of rain and so forth. So I think that we need to reach out to them and ensure that their practices are in line with, and I think it fits somewhat under our climate change initiative right now, but that it's in line with what the land will support on any given year.
Right, right. So we do have two efforts going forth. This is a statewide effort with all of the different regional boards and state board. So internally, just within the Central Valley region, Ben Lenton up in the Reading office is coordinating working with Angela Wilson on a Forest Service waiver that includes grazing. And so I know that they're working directly with the Forest Service on that, and that's probably on a quicker timeline than the statewide effort.
Well, I'd be very interested to see, since its carrying capacity in the forest varies considerably from year to year, as it does on other rangelands for that matter. Be very interested to see what's within that.
Right, absolutely. And so I would say the environmental groups that have participated more actively, I think the primary issue, the primary concerns have been raised have been around public lands, I mean specifically Forest Service allotments. So that is
Good.
definitely something that's on our radar.
Appreciate that. Yes.
Sure.
One of the issues that you mentioned that had been raised is one that seems very important to me, and that is to make sure that even though it's a statewide effort, we appreciate the contribution and participation by other boards, that we make sure that the people and entities that are in our region are fairly represented, because the challenges and the benefits definitely disproportionately affect this area, as you mentioned,
Yes.
with over 40% of the total grazeland being within our region. So I think that probably deserves some high focus as well.
Any further questions?
Yeah, thank you for that report. I'd be interested in the list of the people who have participated, just to scan through it. It's a very complex subject. It's grazing. There's a very strong relationship between private and public lands, and often private ranchers in the lowlands graze their cattle on their private lands during the winter months, and then move them to public lands during the summer months. So this relationship's intricate, and it is, I think, in the public's interest to ensure that grazing on private lands can be economically viable, and on public lands we can do more to protect the ecological values than you might on private land. So there's always going to be a difference there, but we need to be particularly sensitive to this relationship between private landowner grazers who also need that summer range higher in the Sierra. But what Carl's talking about is a yearly issue that perhaps is a key one that needs to be addressed.
Any further comments?
So, Dr. Longley, I understand in previous conversations you had asked for potentially more listening sessions within the Central Valley, and we're certainly
That's
open to that. And we're also considering having a separate workshop with the board on this activity as well. So we'll get together with staff and work out how we will do that timing. April may not be a good time for the grazing activities.
3-day board meeting. No, she
Where it would
says.
probably be best served is if we can wait to when we have the Reading, but that's in October, but that's where most of the grazing activities
And
take
I
place.
understand that we're considering
not true.
possibly having a tour at the Reading meeting of grazing
Right,
practices.
right. So we'll work out the timing and whatnot, but we will do that. I do know that the cattle organization and the Farm Bureau are very concerned with what's going on, and since we have so much of it in the Central Valley, we'll be sure to engage them. But we also have a lot of environmental interest, very concerned with what's going on in cattle grazing, so we need to
Well-
make sure we hear that from them as well.
I hope I'm not misrepresenting Bob's comments, but this is a balancing act.
It is a balancing
And
act.
it's very important that we keep the economic benefit alive and well. And at the same time, we have to consider the ecological impact. The issue is that before we were here, before there was an European influence in the Central Valley or in California, those mountains used to burn every year, and the Native Americans here typically burned them to keep the brush down, the weeds down, and now the cows do that, and we don't get all of the benefits of burning. And a lot of the burning was just from thunderstorms and so forth. Working for the Forest Service, we've had over 200 fires going in the forest at a particular time after a thunderstorm. Man runs around and puts those out. They weren't put out in times past. So there's a balancing act here, and how we make ourselves fit and keep the economy healthy at the same time, protect ecological values is really, as I see it, the end goal. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add that a lot of this work and the partnerships between the environmental organizations and the ranching groups have been worked through the California Rangeland Trust, I believe, and but most of those they've stayed to lower elevation areas just because that's where you can get a lot of agreement. The areas where we're going to run into a responsibility to address and a difficult issue to address is going to be in the higher elevation and on the public lands, I think. But there has been a lot of good cooperation in the past.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I do have 3 staff awards to present.
Sure,
Dr.
go
Long.
ahead. That's why we have the public session, because when we start that, it just goes wild. That makes the difference. We can have a workshop on it, the wider public knows to be a more complete presentation.
So the first Superior Accomplishment Award is going to Griffin Perea, an engineering geologist in our Reading office. Is Griffin here? Griffin is receiving this award for his outstanding work in the Forest Activities Program Unit of the Central Valley Reading office. Griffin is an engineering geologist that came to the Central Valley Board in 2013, with valuable experience from the Bureau of Reclamation. He has made notable contributions to the program, especially in review of post-fire effects and subsequent land management activities. He has also willingly taken on the task of training and assisting our new marijuana watershed enforcement unit staff in their new roles. Griffin maintains a positive, professional attitude and has been successful in establishing good working relationships with the various industry and state agency staff that he interacts with. His sense of humor and his willingness to do whatever is needed makes him an invaluable addition to the Reading office and our board. Thank you.
And Pamela, I'll just say that he was our driver during our Reading tour, and he was very informative. He knew a lot about the area, and he definitely had a good personality. So, congratulations.
Thank you. Now we'll take your picture, so you get to stand right there till we get done. This next one goes to Ann Olson, a senior water resources engineer in our Sacramento office. Ann has worked in the Waste Discharge to Land Unit program for 15 years. Her leadership as the senior in the program in the Sacramento office over the past few years has been outstanding. Her extensive experience and mastery of the program are clearly demonstrated by her productivity and ability to provide invaluable insight. She is the subject matter expert for the Non-15 program. She oversaw the development of the General Order for the Aquifer Storage and Development, which was adopted by the State Board in 2012. Her continued improvements to the program template and guidance documents have enabled staff to significantly increase their efficiency and productivity. Ann also took a leadership role in the evaluation and development of region-wide and statewide initiatives for the Non-15 program. She recently developed the revised waiver for small food processors, wineries, and related agricultural processes, which is on our board today, our agenda today, that's what it says. The waiver will greatly increase the number of dischargers who can seek coverage under the waiver, resulting in fewer individual WDRs. Her expertise and impressive insight are greatly appreciated, and I know I greatly appreciate them too. I turn to Ann a lot, so thank you, Ann. And the last award goes to Lauren Sutton, an engineering geologist in our Fresno office. Lauren works in the confined animal units of the Central Valley Board's Fresno office. Duties for the staff in this unit include regulatory oversight for milk cow dairies, covered under this board's Dairy General Order. Lauren is the case manager for approximately 200 dairies in Kern County and eastern Tulare County. He received the Fresno's Employee Recognition in November for his outstanding performance during the month of October. Lauren's professional demeanor, attention to detail, and excellent work habits are a great contribution to this organization's effort. He readily accepts tasks on short notice and accomplishes the tasks well and on time. His knowledge and organizational skills are useful to other staff in the Confined Animals Unit. He maintains an attitude of professional courtesy and pays attention to detail when interacting with the dairy operators and their consultants during his inspections. His ability to maintain a high standard of ethics reflects greatly on our organization to the public. His consistent high level of productivity is an example for other staff. Congratulations, Lauren. So we'll get pictures.
Okay, let's come back into session. We're on agenda item number 6, I believe. At this time, we have the great pleasure to receive an update from our State Water Board liaison, State Board Member Tam Dudek.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here. And I actually wasn't intending to speak on grazing, but since it came up, and since there's so much interest, if you indulge me, I'll take a bit of time, and
Certainly.
not too much time. I was able to attend the Reading listening session and really appreciated the participation of your staff there. And I think the recap you heard this morning was right on. And let me just add my 2 cents, though. And this is not speaking on behalf of the entire State Water Board, but as just one board member. I recognize the importance of this issue, but as one board member, I learned from sitting there and listening in Reading that I have a lot to learn with respect to grazing practices, the cooperative efforts that Board Member Scheider spoke about. And so I am far from, I think, your staff stressed the importance that no decisions have been made. That is definitely so true on my part, especially with respect to going forward on a statewide effort. I would need to first learn, well, what's actually going on currently in the various regions, what's going on with the cooperative efforts that Board Member Scheider spoke about, and what are the needs that are currently not being met and could not be met through current efforts, and what would be the additional value of any particular proposals that staff may come up on a statewide basis. And so just to extend an invitation, I heard that you're considering tours and whatnot in concert with your board meeting in October in Reading. I have initiated a request for some tours on ranches in March and or April. And obviously, we can't do it with a quorum of the board, but if staff, obviously, from in the Reading office and any board members are interested, I would welcome the opportunity to have you join me as well. It was my hope to be able to visit some of the ranches, meet with the ranchers, learn about the cooperative efforts that are going on, and really ask the question of, what are the needs that are not being met with respect to water quality, and how do we best approach that in a way that also balances the needs of the rancher and the ranching community, which does serve a very important purpose for all of us. So I will extend that invitation and would welcome your participation as well as staff's participation as well.
I appreciate that very much, Tam. Are those, in what area of the state will those visits be held?
Right now, I'm looking at Reading and then perhaps up north into Humboldt as well.
Okay, I would suggest you do one also in the southern Sierra.
Okay,
It's a lot drier and a lot more fragile in many ways.
good. And the only thing final thing that I would add, and I guess this is a request to staff as they regroup after the listening session, is instead of just going off and developing a proposal to bring back to the stakeholder, I would strongly suggest that they work with stakeholders and develop some sort of a collaborative effort in moving ahead in developing a proposal. What I heard in Reading was that there was a lot of concern about things moving forward and being fast-tracking without an adequate understanding of what is currently happening, and also without engaging all the stakeholders, not just the rancher, but obviously also the environmental community, in developing a solution that could be implemented in a collaborative manner going forward. So I would truly encourage all the staff participating in the work group to incorporate that aspect into their development of any proposal.
Very sound advice. Thank you.
And
On the grazing, I just had, there's a lot of research been done at UC Davis and some key people there that should be part of this process for us. Should ask staff that question.
another suggestion that was raised in the listening session that I attended and some communication afterwards was the idea of developing some kind of an advisory group or a blue ribbon panel to bring forth the scientific work that has been developed and accumulated to date, and identifying from that what the needs and the gaps are as part of our discussions and going forward. So,
That would be good. And who would initiate that? Your board, our board?
well, I think we should discuss that.
Good.
So anyway, I apologize for taking time for that, but I thought it was important to at least share my thoughts based on my attendance in Reading and my own communication with various stakeholders on grazing.
We appreciate that.
But let me take the opportunity now, though, to introduce our new Delta Water Master. As you know, the previous Delta Water Master, Craig Johns, I'm sorry, not Craig John, Craig Wilson, to be Craig. And I don't even have an excuse of being vacationing in Hawaii to forget people's names either. Craig Wilson retired after one term as our Delta Water Master. And as the State Water Board, we were interviewing candidates and thinking about, the Delta Water Master position and where we want to go with that position. We were really seeking. Craig did a great job in establishing the foundation for the Delta Water Master Office. But in moving forward, especially in the drought year that we're anticipating again, and looking in towards solving the tremendous challenges involving the Delta, we wanted to have a Delta Water Master that would build upon the work that Craig's done, but also be a strategic partner to the State Water Board, all the divisions, Division of Water Rights and Water Quality, and also be a strategic partner to the Regional Water Board and the Regional Water Board staff in moving forward on these Delta issues. So we're so pleased to appoint, see if I can make sure I don't mangle his name, Michael George as our new Delta Water Master. Michael comes to us with a tremendous background. He's an attorney, he's an investment banker, an executive with a lot of water and energy infrastructure experience, and we're very pleased to have him, and I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce him and if you would allow, ask him to say a few words.
Certainly. And Michael, as you come up here, I have to admire you for having the courage to take on the job.
Well, he's an attorney. Attorneys are brave.
And sometimes foolish.
That was an attorney giving you that opinion.
And I have to say that many of my colleagues in the water industry have been generous in offering their congratulations, and many have offered their condolences. In any case, I'm very pleased. Tam, thank you for the introduction, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to visit with your board. As you know, the Water Master's Office was created in the 2009 Delta Reform legislation, and my position reports jointly to the State Board and to the Delta Stewardship Council, and is an instrument created by the legislature to assist those boards in meeting the co-equal objectives in the Delta of improving water supplies and maintaining, enhancing, and recovering the ecological benefits of that precious estuary. So much of the work that my predecessor, Craig Wilson, has done with the staff has been on the water rights side, on the issues about
Excuse me,
diversions and so forth.
if I could just,
Pardon
you
me?
need to put the speaker closer to your mouth. They can't hear you.
Okay, I'll do that. And I apologize for being away. The chairman of the State Board, Felicia Marcus, often says that when you come to the podium, you should pretend you're a rock star. And that's a lot better than being a water master. So I'll stay close to the I'll stay close to the microphone. As I was saying, the Delta Water Master has been very much focused on water rights, water diversions. And one of the things that is very clear to the board and to me as a result of the discussions with the board leading to my appointment is the importance of water quality, particularly in the southern part of the Delta. And so one of our initiatives from our office is on water quality, and I know that there is a great deal of work that your board and your staff have done in that area, and that the water quality issues in the Delta are unique. And so thanks to Tam as the liaison, we're initiating a dialogue with your staff next week, I'm forgetting what day it is, on the issues of coordination of water quality policy and initiatives in the Delta. So I'm pleased to be here today. I hope this won't be the last time I get invited, and I certainly look forward to working with the board and your staff. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much for that, and we welcome you coming back from time to time and giving us an update. And we're very interested in the fact that you will be working with our staff, and the better that we can find ways to further efforts in the Delta, it's good for California.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now then, we're going to take some things out of order here. We will next be going to, and I'll tell you where we're going. We're next going to be doing the item 9. Tam needs that, and she's going to have to leave. Then we're going to do item 14, and then we're going to do, was it dairies you wanted me to do? And we'll be doing, which item's that? Oh, 8, okay. Good, and then we'll take enforcement review after that, item 7. So we'll start off with item 9 now.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. I am Clay Rogers, an Assistant Executive Officer in your Fresno office, and I'm here today to update you on recent activities in our oil field program. This is an informational item only, and while we appreciate any direction provided, no board action will be taken. The presentation will cover 4 primary areas where we see waste discharge to land in the oil fields. First, I'll provide a brief regulatory status of drilling pits that are used to contain drilling fluids. Then I will spend most of the presentation talking about produced water ponds and our plans to address those. Then I'm going to present information on where we are with water board efforts related to injection of oil field waste using Class 2 injection wells. And I'll finish up with regulation of well stimulation activities related to Senate Bill 4 or SB 4. I'll start with a short refresher on drilling mud since I've presented this slide the past couple of presentations I provided to you. Drilling mud is a critical part of the drilling operation. This slide shows circulation of the drilling mud during drilling. The mud carries produced cuttings out of the borehole, and since there's a lot of friction, it also cools the bit so that it basically doesn't destroy it quite as fast. In oil drilling, the mud is typically weighted to prevent loss of control should a high-pressure zone be encountered, so we don't get things like spectacular blowouts. Fluid control is also accomplished by forming a mud cake on the side of the borehole walls, which helps to stabilize the borehole. On a drill rig location, the mud is typically stored in a series of tanks or an excavated mud pit. The mud pit is used to store excess mud and as waste storage for cuttings, and if characteristics of the mud are changed, or actually when the mud is removed from the borehole at the completion of drilling. In areas or at depths where fresh water may be encountered, the drilling mud typically has a low salinity. Casing is required during drilling, is installed during drilling to the base of fresh water to seal these freshwater zones off from saline fluids and petroleum that may be encountered during deeper drilling. When drilling below the base of fresh water, salts are typically added to the drilling muds, and this is typically achieved by adding potassium chloride. This photo is of a drilling location in the valley and shows a drilling pit adjacent to an actively drilling rig. Until December of 2013, oil and gas drilling pits were regulated using our low-threat waiver of waste discharge requirements. Oil and gas well drilling mud were not included in the waiver when it was renewed in December of 2013. Since that time, we have been using a state board general order for low-threat discharges for those discharges or those pits that can meet the conditions of that order. If the discharge cannot meet the conditions of that order, the discharger has an option to submit a report of waste discharge or RWD for an individual order, or use a process that does not include discharge of waste to land, such as above ground tanks. To date, in areas where the use of the general order is not appropriate, it has been reported that dischargers are using above-ground tanks. The general order does not allow, in the previous waiver, did not allow the land discharge of non-drilling waste to a drilling pit. This includes fluids used for completion of a well or well stimulation, such as hydraulic fracturing fluids. We have taken and are pursuing formal enforcement where this condition has been violated. This process seems to be working well. Since we've undertaken this, we have a much better understanding of where these pits are located and how they are operating. In areas where unlined drilling pits are a significant threat to water quality, the practices have been modified. Staff is not proposing a different order to address these wastes, nor are we suggesting that in areas where underlying groundwater quality is poor, that unlined pits should not be employed. Now I'm going to start talking about produced water ponds, and I'll concentrate on this area today because it is an area where significant amounts of waste discharge are occurring, and it's been rather controversial. These two photographs show the basic range of active ponds, from large facilities like the one on the left that have mini ponds and receive water from a large number of wells, to small facilities like the one on the right that have a single pond and take produced water perhaps from only one well. The Central Valley Water Board has had minimal resources to deal with these issues in the past. Recent reevaluation of oil field activities has caused us to prioritize this and look at these facilities and their potential impact to groundwater quality in much more detail and much more extensively than we have in the past. Therefore, we have put together a plan to address this issue and began implementing that plan last December with a 2-year schedule to basically address the ponds. I will detail this plan in upcoming slides. However, before I do that, I want to provide you a brief overview of produced water and update you on a request to both the Central Valley Water Board and the State Board to immediately close all produced water ponds. In 2013, an estimated 1.9 billion barrels of water were produced during oil well extraction in the Central Valley. A barrel is 42 gallons of water to one barrel. So the 1.9 billion barrels is just under 80 billion barrels of water. It's a lot of water. The constituents we are most concerned about are salts and petroleum constituents, but there's also potential for other things like radionuclides and other constituents also. The Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, or what will be referred to as the DOGGR during this presentation, reported that 878 million barrels of water were used for enhanced oil recovery in 2013. This includes water used to generate steam and water used for water flood within oil-bearing zones to assist in the recovery of oil. It is unknown how much of this water is produced water and how much of that water comes from other sources. An additional 681 million barrels of produced water were disposed using Class II injection wells regulated under the Underground Injection Control Program that I'll talk about also a little later in the program, and those wells in that program is overseen primarily by the DOGGR. Most of the remaining produced water is disposed of by discharge in surface ponds, or what we're referring to here as produced water ponds. A small portion of this water, where the quality is adequate, is recycled for use as irrigation water, and we're actually working where the water quality is suitable to encourage that we recycle that water, particularly in Kern County, because we're in such a water short situation in the southern San Joaquin Valley. As with all waste discharges we regulate, if it isn't done properly, significant impacts to water quality can occur. And we're working to ensure that where these discharges take place, the ability to beneficially use our waters is not affected. In September of last year, the Central Valley Water Board received a request from Clean Water Action to prohibit all produced water discharges to unlined ponds. We responded later that month that we are addressing the issue, but that closure of all facilities we do not believe is appropriate. Since September, we have refined our approach and generated a plan to address ponds over a 2-year period that ends in December of 2016. And we've also prioritized to identify resources to implement that plan. We have 6 staff basically dedicated over the next 2 years to do this. This occurred after working with State Board to have them continue working on implementation of SB4 for well stimulation and taking the lead on a lot of the underground injection control issues. Regional board staff are still involved in a review capacity in those areas. And also we're staying involved because these responsibilities will eventually come back to the regional board. Last week, the State Water Board received a letter from Clean Water Action stating that the Central Valley Water Board is failing to implement state water quality laws, and they requested State Board to issue an immediate moratorium on the disposal method and develop a policy that prohibits it and provides additional oversight of wastewater disposal from the oil and gas industry. We're discussing this request with the State Board, and we anticipate that we will provide some assistance and input in how they respond to that. Now I'm going to talk about the plan itself. The plan has 4 basic components, starting with a systematic inventory of existing ponds. The second part is field inspections of known and suspected surface ponds, enforcement action for ponds that are not under waste discharge requirements is the third part, and adoption of general order waste discharge requirements that will provide regulatory coverage for ponds that can comply with conditions of the orders. The most important condition will be that they are protective of water quality. Each of these components are described in more detail on the next 4 slides. The purpose of the pond inventory was to identify the status and location of these land discharges, since we weren't sure where all of this was occurring. We actually completed this task last month. This was done by evaluating data that was provided to us by the Dogger, information that we had received from operators, and we did extensive review of aerial photographs looking for suspicious parts that we're now in the process of going out in the field. As of last week, we know of 927 ponds that are both active and inactive. Inactive ponds are those that are no longer being used or are converted to secondary containment for above-ground tanks. Ponds that are used occasionally, such as when injection wells are offline for maintenance, are considered active. We found 55 more ponds than what we had originally thought. The number was 927 minus 55. I don't know what that is right now off the top of my head, but we did find 55 new ponds. Of the 927 ponds that we believe are out there, 544 of those are under waste discharge requirements, and 383 currently do not have any regulatory coverage.
So, Clay, what's the timeline before you think that we should have all ponds under some sort of regulatory coverage?
Our timeline is to get this project completed in 2 years.
2 years. I heard that earlier, but I wanted to make sure.
So
Yeah, I'll go through this a little bit more in detail, but
So on those, the 383 that don't have regulatory coverage, is that directly to an enforcement action, or What is, that's what you're going to walk through in a second?
That's what
Okay,
I'll
all right.
walk through in just a minute. If you let me, I'll get to that, but I'll be happy to answer
I'll
any
wait.
questions.
I'll wait.
As of last Friday, January 29th, we had inspected 755 of those 927 ponds since last April, with the vast majority of those being conducted since the 1st of December. The purpose of the inspections is to document the status and conditions of the ponds on each facility. If we identified potential ponds from aerial photographs, we are also confirming whether or not they actually exist. We are also collecting field information useful in future permitting and enforcement actions. We have also collected a limited number of wastewater samples for chemical analysis. This is being done where these data could influence prioritization or enforcement. But I will tell you that, as we move forward with this program, extensive analysis of this water so we understand exactly what's being discharged will be required as part of waste discharge requirements and enforcement orders. I should also mention that while staff are on inspections, especially since staff are in areas that we have not visited extensively in the past, we're looking for additional ponds that may have been missed or other discharges that could pose a potential threat to water quality. This task will be completed by the end of February. As of January 29th, we had an estimated 120 ponds remaining to inspect. So we're on schedule. Our original schedule was to complete this task by the end of February. And that includes not only doing the field inspections themselves, but also pressing to get the inspection reports out, sent to the dischargers, and get through that process. So we are expediting these activities to move through this as timely as we can with the resources we have available. For those facilities that have active ponds not covered by waste discharge requirements, they will receive enforcement orders. Our current estimate is that we will have about 200 facilities for which enforcement orders will need to be issued. The majority of these orders will be cleanup and abatement orders, utilizing our staff enforcement authorities. There may also be orders for facilities that are under waste discharge requirements, where we believe additional protections are needed to address water quality, because the orders are outdated, the current orders are outdated, and it's determined that these facilities need to have additional work done to demonstrate that they can operate and be protective of water quality. In addition, for the facilities under waste discharge requirements that do not have flow limitations, cease and desist orders are being contemplated to actually place a flow limitation on these facilities. Some of the attorneys have informed me that we need to do a cease and desist order instead of a cleanup and abatement order to work on that, but I actually need to talk to Patrick in a little bit more detail about exactly how we do that. What we don't want to do is have the unintended consequence of all this, that we go through some of these issues and then we find out that some of these larger facilities that, particularly the larger ones, that are taking significant fluids, especially as I talk about the underground injection control issues, that we find out that there's significant increase in flows while we go through this process to make sure that they're protective of water quality and what they're doing is appropriate. And so we believe that this is a place where we should put a flow limitation and not have the unintended consequence of addressing one part of the problem only to see a huge increase in another part. The enforcement orders are being done in lieu of reports of waste discharge, and they will require actions in a more timely manner to enhance and speed up that protection of water quality. These actions will be required in accordance with a time schedule particularly for those facilities that do not have waste discharge requirements. This will put them under a time schedule to complete these actions in a timely manner, in lieu of just saying the discharge has to cease. Although in areas where it's clear that it's not appropriate for those actions to occur, that will be done on a timely manner. These actions could require ceasing discharge and closing the ponds where the beneficial uses of groundwater cannot be protected. The schedule for enforcement orders is to be in place by the end of this calendar year. To meet this schedule, the cleanup and abatement orders will be issued under delegated authority, and we're not anticipating bringing them in front of the board. However, they may be somewhat controversial, and if they become very controversial, at least the first couple, I would anticipate we would probably bring them to the board to get your input. Excuse me. However, where we have 200 of them to do, we're not anticipating bringing all of them to the board because a resource issue and a timing issue.
Well, if necessary, and that's a judgment call down the road, but in the past, in another program, and we had a whole bunch of similar actions, we had panels that board members, and as you well know, you were part of that process. And so if it becomes necessary, there's ways to do it to streamline the process and still get the intended necessary results.
And certainly if we get to that, panels will be one of the things where we consider that for those actions and bring them to the board if that is a process that's needed for us to successfully complete this. We're also working on developing a permitting strategy that would involve issuing a general permit or permits to update waste discharge requirements for facilities that are already regulated and to cover facilities that currently need waste discharge requirements. Developing a general order would eliminate the need for individual waste discharge requirements. One concept would be to develop 3 different general orders to address 3 types of situations that the board regularly encounters. The first general order would regulate facilities that can meet Tulare Lake Basin Plan maximum salinity limits of 1,000 micromole per centimeter electrical conductivity, 200 milligrams per liter chloride, and 1 milligram per liter boron. And we use that because the ponds that we're talking about are all located within the Tulare Lake Basin. We're not aware of any ponds in the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Basin. They're all associated with the very large oil fields in the southern San Joaquin Valley.
Clay, so when you say the facility meets the limits, is that the influent?
The discharge.
The discharge, okay.
Yeah, the effluent
Okay.
to the pond would meet those.
Effluent to the pond, okay, right.
The inflow to the pond.
The inflow to the ponds.
There we go, okay.
Effluent from the facility, inflow to the pond. Excuse me. The second general order would regulate those facilities whose discharges would not be expected to unreasonably impact beneficial uses in the receiving water, even though they may exceed the basin plan's salinity limits. The third general order would regulate facilities that overlie naturally poor quality groundwater that may not actually support the beneficial uses. While this general order would still impose certain requirements on those facilities, the board would concurrently evaluate and revise the basin plan to implement a regulatory strategy consistent with the limited water quality found in those areas. Facilities whose discharges cannot be brought into compliance with the board requirements would have to cease operating, and the board would mandate that these facilities be properly closed.
Do we know of instances where ponds are different facilities with different ownerships share the same pond?
Mostly what we're aware of. I mean, we have a lot of individual ones that are operated by individual operators. We also have some very large facilities that are run by an entity called Valley Water Management Company. Used to be called Valley Waste, but they changed their name to Valley Water a couple years ago. And that is a consortium of oil companies that formed a third party to handle their produced water. And they have a number of facilities in Kern County. Matter of fact, if you remember that picture that was on the left of the very large facility, that is one of their facilities in the McKittrick area. So I'm not aware of where two companies share one, although I can't tell you that that is not a situation where that could occur.
And this goes to the influent and facility and pond. I'm just trying to wrap my head around who would be the regulated party. Would it be the producer of the water or the owner of the pond, or are they the same folks?
Typically, it's going to be the operator of the facility, assuming that they own the land. It would be the landowner, and the operator is typically who the regulatory. Oh, am I getting a little quiet?
You have to be a rock
I'll
star.
lean forward a little bit. I am.
He's just a quiet rock star.
As a geologist, I'm a rock star.
There you go. Oh,
I want to make sure
Sorry.
that's in the record. Is that in there?
yeah, strike that from the record.
I lost my place now.
Doesn't matter. You're in a good place.
No, actually, I'm sorry, John. I did lose my.
It was the question about the large ponds, multiple ownership.
Yeah, I mean, usually it's the operators and the property owners, if they're not the same, that are the regulated parties. You know, and I would have to defer maybe to Patrick a little bit about what our authorities are to regulate a party that might, you know, pay another company to discharge. I mean, we don't regulate that in our other, like landfills and stuff. We don't regulate the people that pay the landfill company to discharge the waste. So I don't see us reaching back to the company that provides the water, although in most instances here, the operators are the actual generators of that water, or they're, in the case of Valley Water, they actually are part of that third party, I believe, although
Well, Valley
I'm
Water-
not sure what their
yeah.
legal organization.
Yeah, Valley Water has been in existence for a long time. One, that name or the previous name, and certainly Patrick can address our authority there, but it's my understanding that they're owned by the companies that provide them the waste materials that they process.
That is my understanding too, although I have
Yeah.
not seen any formal
Document to
how
that
they're
effect,
how
right.
they're organized.
Right.
And if you want me to comment, generally speaking, if there's an unpermitted discharge that's impacting water quality, there's a lot of people that we could potentially go after in an enforcement context. In a permitting context, we generally, the landowner's responsible, and then whoever, frankly, organizes the situation and submits the report of waste discharge, and that can be anybody from the operator to a consortium to whatever group is taking responsibility for putting that document forward. So again, we're pretty flexible in the waste discharge permitting context because frankly in the cleanup context there's a lot of people that could be responsible.
That's helpful,
So
thank you.
You go up the chain, in other words, on enforcement.
With
As
an
we-
enforcement
as we have
context,
done.
we very often go up the chain to
Right.
figure out who's responsible. In the permitting context, it's much more friendly, and
Right.
we're much more flexible about who pays the fees and is responsible for oversight. We're amenable to a lot of different situations in that context.
And let me add before I leave this area that, you know, Our schedule right now is to have this completed by December of 2016, 2 years from last December, and that would include, proceeding with enforcement actions where they're needed, having the orders in place, starting to get in a situation where we get the notices of intent, file notices of applicability as suitable to come under those general orders and move forward. But our plan is to address this within the next 2 years so that we understand which facilities are appropriate to continue, which facilities need to modify or look at alternative disposal methods for their actions, and to move forward on this.
If I can just for a minute, and I want to keep you thinking about your microphone over there, Clay, for the recorder, but he said it's the enforcement orders we're issuing are in lieu of waste discharge, report of waste discharge. This will be for us to put them under a regulatory order by the board, an enforcement order, while staff develops the orders. They would those that we find should be regulated and not closed would be required to file for a report of waste discharge for one of the orders or one order that we develop. So it's not in lieu of forever. It's during the time period while we're developing the order. So I want to make that clear. And some of them then would go under an order and be done with their enforcement order, and others may stay under both waste discharge requirements and enforcement depending on the circumstances.
Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the underground injection control program. Since this seems to have gotten a lot of attention lately, and it certainly is an area where we are concerned. The map on the right shows is a general location map of Class 2 waste disposal injection wells in the southern San Joaquin Valley. And let me just add that there's a lot of injection wells, and the number, my understanding is the number is in the thousands. Injection wells are regulated under the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, and with the exception of the Class 2 injection wells for oil and gas activities, those regulations are implemented by the U.S. EPA in California. The Dogger has overseen the regulation of Class 2 injection wells since 1984 under a primacy agreement with U.S. EPA. There are basically two types of injection wells that we deal with. These are waste disposal wells whose purpose is to dispose of oil-filled waste, and enhanced oil recovery, which are wells used to inject water or steam to assist in the recovery of oil. The Safe Drinking Water Act requires exemption of aquifers or zones where injection occurs unless the total dissolved solids concentrations within that zone is greater than 10,000 parts per million, in which case they're categorically exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act. I'm not going to go into the specifics of how zones are exempted unless you would like me to. I can do that, but it'll take a few minutes. Except to add that the Dogger proposes zones to be exempted to the U.S. EPA, and the U.S. EPA must approve that request before it's effective and valid. I should mention that there is a 1988 Memorandum of Agreement between the Dogger and the water boards regarding the UIC program, and this was designed primarily to prevent duplication of regulatory activities, and basically talks about how the two agencies interact in addressing issues. Our responsibility on this has been in the past to basically serve in a review capacity. So now I'm going to talk just a little bit about where we are and where we're going. You know, in that review capacity, historically the water boards have had no resources for underground injection control since the Dogger has the primacy agreement for the program, issues permits, takes enforcement actions, and so forth. However, again, the memorandum of agreement did have Dogger provide did have the regional board have the ability to comment on injection well permit applications and aquifer exemptions. With no resources to do this, we did not put a lot of effort into this in the past. And when the Dogger would send us permit applications with the comment that these zones were exempted, we left it at that because it was their regulatory program. We didn't concentrate much on the permit applications. To my knowledge, we've had one exemption application submitted to us in the past 7 years. And on that one, we had serious concerns about what the Dogger was proposing to exempt. We met with Dogger staff during that process and explained our concerns, and the application was not moved forward. During the early stages of implementation of Senate Bill 4 during the spring of last year, regional board staff and state board staff working together became aware that some aquifers receiving injected oil-filled waste did not appear to have been formally exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act. Because of this, we started meeting with the Dogger and asking more questions, and became concerned that injection of oil-filled wastewater could be occurring into zones that were being used for drinking water and other beneficial uses. This started a review of injection wells with questionable exemptions, particularly those that were relatively shallow and nearby and had nearby water supply wells. The review is being conducted by the Dogger, the State Board, and the Central Valley Water Board, and is continuing and ongoing. Based on significant issues discovered during the review, last fall the Central Valley Water Board issued 11 orders for technical information to operators of 28 injection wells that staff felt were particularly at risk for impacts from nearby injection wells, and appeared to be into zones that were not properly exempted. The orders required submittal of data about the water quality within the injection zone and identification of all water supply wells within 1 mile of the injection well, along with all available information about the water supply well so we would understand where the water was being produced from. Most of our orders were sent in unison with stop injection orders from the Dogger that also required technical information regarding what was being injected. That information was also submitted to us, and our information was also required to be, the information we had in our orders was also required to be submitted to the Dogger. In conjunction with this effort, staff worked with State Board to identify nearby drinking wells and determine if there was a significant and imminent threat to public health that indicated that water samples should be collected from any of the nearby water supply wells for chemical analysis. We did actually collect samples. Regional board staff collected samples from 9 wells and had the samples analyzed for a wide range of constituents. And we did that on a very rapid turnaround because if there was an issue, we wanted to be able to tell affected parties as soon as possible. Even if this activity had been going on for a while, we were concerned about what we might find and decided that time was of the essence and moved forward as fast as we could. We completed that task when we could have required it of well operators, again because we felt time was of the essence. Evaluation of the samples from those 9 wells fortunately did not identify impact by wastewater injection activities. As the evaluation continues, additional orders for technical information may be sent, and we're contemplating that as information is reviewed, and additional samples from water supply wells may be collected and analyzed. Because we are concentrating our available oil-filled resources on dealing with produced water ponds, State Board is taking a larger role in this effort than they did a few months ago. They are working directly with the Dogger in reviewing injection activities and identifying whether additional orders need to be sent. Our staff are communicating with State Board, and I interact with the State Board folks on almost a daily basis to provide assistance as this goes on, also to stay involved, and also to be sure that we are aware of what's going on and actually have some say in what's going on, because as we move through the pond, the produced water pond issues, these issues are going to be with us for a long time. These responsibilities will come back to the Water Board staff. The last part of the presentation today will be in regards to well stimulation and implementation of Senate Bill 4. Senate Bill 4 is legislation that established a program for regulating well stimulation activities that include hydraulic fracturing. Currently, there is an interim program in place, and the State Board and Dogger are working on permanent regulations scheduled to go into effect on the 1st of July of this year. On the right is a schematic of the classic process of hydraulic fracturing, which is the type of well stimulation that seems to be of the greatest concern. Here you have a well that is drilled vertically for some distance, and then drilling proceeds horizontally through a zone that is to be fractured to enhance production. This is done primarily where the zones of interest are relatively thin, maybe on the order of a couple 100 feet or less. This becomes efficient because one horizontal well can intercept the same area as what would need a significant number of vertical wells. And sometimes that horizontal component can be thousands of feet long. 4,000 or 5,000 would not be all that unusual. Something on the order of 700 wells per year are hydraulically fractured in the Central Valley. And almost all of these are in the southern San Joaquin Valley. And this is the vast majority of all hydraulic fracturing activities in the state. There are hydraulic fracturing activities in the other state, but by far the greatest number are in Kern County. Only a small number of the wells being subject to this process in the Central Valley actually have a horizontal component, since most are through zones where the target or the pay zone is relatively thick, so the efficiency and the economics of the horizontal well don't pan out, so they tend to be mostly vertical wells where that pay zone is of significant vertical thickness.
You showed this on your slide as a gas-bearing formation, but that could be an oil-bearing formation.
It could be an oil-bearing
Right.
formation, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I went through and found something on the internet.
Wikipedia, yes, I see.
And I did provide the reference there for where this came from. I have to admit I compressed it a little bit horizontally to be able to put some bullets on the side so I could do this in one slide, but we're working on it. Dogger is responsible for much of SB4, including permitting. However, a number of actions are required of the water boards. Groundwater monitoring is required unless the operator can demonstrate that there is no protected water. And protected water is that water that has a TDS of less than 10,000 milligrams per liter or parts per million. Dogger determines if the criteria are met, but the water boards are to provide concurrence if appropriate. The Dogger and the water boards are working concurrently to review groundwater monitoring plans where they're needed, and the groundwater monitoring has to occur. Senate Bill 4 requires operators of wells to be stimulated to pay for a third party to sample water supply wells near wells that are to be stimulated if requested by the property owner. State Board has been responsible for compiling a list of approved firms to collect the water samples from these wells. And basically, the oil companies are required, if somebody asks them to have a well sampled, to contact somebody on that list of approved firms to have them go out and collect the sample, and then the oil company or the operator pays the fee. State Board is also responsible for developing model criteria for groundwater monitoring as part of the permanent regulations. State Board is also working with outside experts to develop the criteria. With our available oil field resources concentrating on produced water program, State Board has continued to take the lead on addressing all aspects of Senate Bill 4 in the Central Valley. Our staff, again, is providing assistance to State Board when requested. When this work is transferred to the Central Valley Water Board, we can provide you a much more detailed update on activities related to this effort. And if the board would like a detailed update on exactly what is going on with SB4 before this transfer occurs, certainly we can request of State Board to have somebody come and provide that. With that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions by board members? I want to thank you for a very thorough presentation. Yes.
No, I was just, thank you. There's lots of process ahead, and I had a briefing on this just to make sure I understood what's coming, and I'm comfortable that the different tiers, the different thoughts, the testing that's being done is leading to a direction that we can protect the water quality and still understand exactly what's going on. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I was remiss in not reading the procedure on this, because as you stated, I believe this is an information item. The board will be taking no action. And I'd also like to add that there has been in the past some discussion between the executive officer and myself. And I think this, I'm saying this with a state board member in the room because they're key to hearing this. Yes, Stam. Pamela and I have had discussion in the past about the advisability of possibly establishing an office in the Bakersfield area in Kern County, simply by the greatly increased level of activity that we have there now, and the possible advisability of having staff closer to where the action's occurring. So that's something we'd like to consider a dialogue on, because I know that'll take additional resources. And how that, if that's a satellite of the Fresno office or a standalone office, it would be another consideration. But I include that here because the level of activity you saw in this presentation is just one of the several programs that we're doing a lot of work on in the Kern County. It's about 2 hours out of Fresno. It's a time and distance issue. Thank you very much. We also have testimony here from Clean Water Action. Once again, you got to act like a rock star, Andrew.
I need a good tech guy. Thank you, Clay. Thank you very much, board and members. My name is Andrew Grinberg. I'm the Oil and Gas Program Manager with Clean Water Action, and really appreciate the time and energy going into this issue of dealing with oil field water quality regulatory issues. And the increased attention on this issue and the hard work being put in by staff is definitely noticed. And that goes for, within the Central Valley and around the state, as, the issue of oil and gas in California with fracking, acidizing, SB4 has become really a very high profile issue. And, hearing the interest and getting more closer attention, an office in Bakersfield, more resources on the ground are certainly things that a lot of folks would support, and definitely see the value in that and making sure we've got close eyes on all these issues. Just kind of from a macro level, zooming out, all the things that Clay just spoke about are really valuable. First of all, just for getting a better understanding of really what's going on in oil fields in California. there's been, you know, a lot of discussion publicly about what the impacts of fracking and other oil development really is on the state, and the type of work going on the ground, taking a look at these individual facilities, you know, getting groundwater monitoring programs in place. This is the type of thing we really need here in California to make sure we understand the scope of the problem or potential problems or any threats or potential threats. We do appreciate, you know, increased scrutiny and, you know, moving forward on inventorying and inspecting these pits. We do, however, have a difference of opinion on really what the ultimate approach should be. When you review literature from industry best management practices, when you review really all the reporting and news about water contamination near oil spills, near oil fields, produced water spills and disposal into open pits is really the most common and easiest way that we are putting our groundwater at risk. That's why Clean Water Action and a number of other groups have called on both the Central Valley Board, and now we've gone to the State Board to request an immediate prohibition on this type of disposal. The last letter that we submitted to the State Board had sign-ons from 18 organizations from across the state. While most of the activity is in the Central Valley region, we do see this as a statewide issue, as you know, impacts to Kern County groundwater is you know, of concern for everyone, whether it's someone up in the Delta or you know, the Bay Area or Southern California, where you know, all our water is connected and need to deal with it. What we should really be doing is focusing on closing these pits down and moving forward with cleaning them up and holding the operators and responsible parties accountable for any potential contamination or degradation of water quality. We think that, you know, with what sounds like hundreds of unregulated pits, the fact that they're continuing to discharge today without those permits in place really does not make sense. So I did have a question of the 383 pits, how many that are unregulated? Did you say how many are active versus idle? I don't know if that was mentioned or if I missed it.
I believe something probably on the order of 60 or 70% of those are active, but I don't have an exact number.
Thank you. So I would say, you know, at a very minimum level, those operators should stop discharging today and really decades ago. So I'm not sure why we're continuing to allow this type of discharge into unregulated facilities. That's kind of at the basic, most, you know, floor level protection that we should be going for here. Going forward, you know, the general order concept, you know, I definitely see some flaws in that unless the general order specifically prohibits this type of disposal. Really, you know, this is an outdated technology. Many operators do not dump their waste into open pits, and it's unclear why we should be allowing oil companies to continue to do this. So I would say, you know, in you know, some of the examples that Clay talked about, the very large facilities, you know, we've seen a history of inadequate oversight, you know, unwillingness or, you know, inability to enforce the laws, the lack of resources here at the board, at the Central Valley Board level with staffing, and at the State Board level also, you know, really does raise concerns. It is great to hear that there are more man hours coming onto this job. However, we still see a big problem with being able to enforce and regulate the oil industry here in California. And we're seeing that play out as the things Clay described with Dogger on injection wells. You know, there's a lot of problems with keeping the oil industry in line, as has been well documented now. And the more we learn about the industry, the more we find out about these problems. So I would just say that...
let me interrupt you, Andrew. I guess my concern with your comments is you're throwing all producers into the same basket, and it's been documented that a number of those dischargers, in fact, are producing pretty high quality water, good enough that it can be used for agriculture, and meets drinking water standards in some cases. And you're putting them in the same basket as the ones who are not doing the right thing. So that concerns me, that you have only, it's either black or white to you. There's no gray areas.
Sure, I understand that concern, and why you would question that. As far as, you know, use of produced water for irrigation, I would say that it's another area that, you know, is not part of today's item, is something that likely needs more oversight as well. I've went and actually visited the facilities where they're doing this, and really the only treatment they're doing to the produced water, and it smells like hydrocarbons and oil, is simply diluting it with fresh water and, you know, in a surface canal. So I would say that's another area we should be taking a look at. And in general, you know, what we're doing with oil and gas wastewater, you know, it runs the gamut, and there's a number of, you know, varying levels of quality, as you correctly pointed out. However, I would say all of these things deserve more oversight and attention. And, you know, I'll leave my comment on that right there.
Well, I don't disagree with you on the oversight. I just, to shut them all down when some are not are producing water that we desperately need to keep people employed, growing crops is something that concerns me.
And not only that, but we have to also recognize that there's been a historical private property interest in the way that these places have operated. So, you know, just to decide that, you know, today we think that it's not the right time for them to continue to do this can't be an action that we can sort of unilaterally take. I mean, there is administrative process that is in place to protect, you know, the environment, and the same thing, we have to also respect those property rights as well. So I think that your point is well taken about, you know, the equal importance of industry and environment, and that's, I see that from you, and I appreciate that, but we do have to recognize that there are private property interests at issue.
Sure, I understand. And, you know, creating a permanent prohibition, I understand that there would be a process for creating that policy. I guess for the immediate, you know, shutdown, you know, at a bare minimum, the unregulated facilities should not be producing, should not be discharging at the moment. So I do want to address some of the other issues, the underground injection control program, and aquifer exemption, since that was covered in Clay's presentation. You know, I would highly recommend more water board involvement, whether it's at the state or regional level, in any type of exemption process. And it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, things are moving forward on that, and that should be reflected in any updated MOUs with Dogger. Definitely need more testing and oversight. As Clay mentioned, there was some limited testing on those initial wells that were shut down, or near the initial wells that were shut down. We should definitely be seeing a robust plan to really make sure and identify any potential impacts from improper disposal. From, you know, the reporting that's come out, you know, really over the last few days, in the San Francisco Chronicle ran a big story where they dug into some of the data on injection wells. It looks like up to potentially 500 injection wells are disposing into aquifers that may or may not have proper exemption status. And while this is definitely an issue that should be falling on Dogger to handle as water quality regulators, this is certainly of concern, and I hope that you guys are staying in the loop on that and making it clear that where any usable groundwater is at risk from improperly permitted injection wells, that, you know, immediate action is taken. And I think in the coming days and weeks, we're going to be hearing more from Dogger about really what those threats and risks are, and you know, folks at the state and regional board may be involved in that process, and you guys may know better than me. Would also add, just on the SB4 item and moving forward with groundwater monitoring, there's been a bunch of debate, and it's mostly the state board taking this on, so I understand this isn't directly in your purview, but making sure that groundwater monitoring plans also address disposal of wastewater, and specifically those injection wells. And as we're seeing, you know, really, you know, a mismanagement of the program by Dogger, more oversight from water quality regulators is definitely warranted, and being more involved in whether it's the exemption process or the permitting process, and then the monitoring process where these operations are happening. So just encourage an active role by the regional board, and you know, understand that it takes resources and that there's a lot on your guys' plate right now, and you know, we support moving forward and the prioritizing you've done so far. So thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you do have any.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
No, but if you could, do you have a card you could leave? Thanks.
Very good. Bill Elliott.
Hi, I'm Bill Alia with the Environmental Working Group, California Director of Government Affairs here in Sacramento. Appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the interest in the board. I think Andrew and I have been here, this is the third time, and you welcomed us to be here and encouraged us to come back, and appreciate the
Bill,
prior.
you need to be a rock star. Sorry.
Really? All right.
For some reason, our microphone is not very sensitive. We apologize. You got to get close to it.
And for prioritizing this with your staff, because I remember the first meeting we were at, you said they're doing ag. Is that good? They're doing ag and other things, and so to have them get onto the oil and gas issue was important. I'm the guy who went into Dogger in January 2011 and said, "Are we fracking?" And they said no, and the rest is history now. The oil companies, one of the lobbyists is here, and he said, "Yeah, we are. I don't know why they're saying that. We're willing to work with you and get it regulated." So we finally did that with SB4. In 2010, Jeremy Miller wrote a story for High Country News called "Oil and Water Don't Mix in Kern County." If you haven't read it, it's important because he was onto something here about what is going on in Kern County with all the water going in and where does it go to. And one thing you haven't talked about is freshwater inputs. When you call the Kern County Water Agency, they won't tell you how much water the oil companies are getting from the state water project. They said it's proprietary. We don't have to tell you. But where they're getting their water from and what they're doing with it is important. On private property rights, I don't really understand the comment because we're not talking about vested rights here. If you are a nuisance or pollute the air or ground, you lose that right to do so. So we're not saying you can't produce oil. We're just saying that if there's an impact, you have to deal with it. I don't think there's a threat to shutting them down and taking away all rights, because to do that would be an inverse condemnation. You'd have to basically say you can't do anything there anymore. So I don't think we have to worry about that. But back to the issue, when the MOA was done in '88, it said, Dogger, you will do the injection, and we, the board, and the regional boards will do the surface disposal. And even though I'm glad to see everything going on here, it's kind of, from my view of looking at both sides, have fallen down on the job, because the waste pits have been termed legacy by your staff and the Dogger staff. In fact, they are not legacy. They are being used actively, hundreds of them. And now we found out most are not, or many are not permitted. I did have a question. When you see an array of disposal pits, 30, 40 lined up, do you count that as one pit, or do you count each one in your count of 900 plus?
We count each individual pit. So like the picture on the left is like 45,
Right.
45 ponds on one facility. So when we say 927 ponds, there's quite a fewer number of facilities.
Got it. That's good to hear, because otherwise there'd be thousands. So when I visited with Dogger, they would say things like, we don't have water quality expertise here, because we're talking about possible impacts of fracking, which is disturbing because they're in charge of the underground injection control program and putting billions of gallons of water underground. Also, my understanding is that all that water has to be assayed by the producer before they dispose of it and give those numbers, that assessment, to the Dogger. I'm not sure I can access those things at Dogger to find out what they're injecting. I would say, should we be doing the same thing with these open pits? What are they putting into the pits? Do they have to assay that? Why is that any different? It's the same water. And I think there's been a feeling that, well, Kern County's a waste area. And it's the Wild West, like the oil companies own it. And we're getting away from that finally. The regional board and Dogger especially has been exposed, and I don't think and the new leadership there is not going to have it that way. So why shouldn't we know what's going into the pits? And I would maintain it's not just what you can measure that way, it's what you don't see. It's what's going into the air. And that's why I agree with Clean Water Action. We signed the letter. It's an archaic method of disposal in a county with horrible air quality. You go there to these pits, you can smell it and see the wavering of stuff coming up. So why should we say, well, there's no potable groundwater under it, let them keep doing it? In an area, I know you don't do air quality, but it's part of the thing that we should just say, you know what, these have to be, if not immediately shut, phased out immediately, so that we aren't doing it anymore, whether they're lined or unlined. It's not a waste area. On the west side of Kern that they've characterized as a desert, Chevron pumps good groundwater out to use for their steam flooding operations. They're not in Kern River Basin on the east side. They're on the west side, the desert side of Kern, getting good groundwater out. So who knows what's happened there over the last 80, 100 years. This is the 100-year anniversary of Dogger, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you.
Carl.
Yes.
I had
Any
a
discussion by the
couple
board?
comments, just,
Yes.
one of this, while I'm all for efficiency in government and weeding out duplication, sometimes duplication can be really important, and especially when you have multimedia, like we talked about air quality, water quality, and providing oil and gas to run our cars. And this is one of those areas where having some of that might have prevented some of these problems in the past. But as we go forward, in other areas, I think being really cognizant of these, particularly where we have multimedia efforts, and making sure those are truly coordinated, and we play our role of protecting water quality. Being a geologist, and lawyers are lawyers and engineers are engineers, but geologists are rock stars. So
I knew you'd get that in, Bob.
the loss of aquifer storage ability is pretty serious in this day and age. Certainly groundwater recharge and extraction is our cheapest storage reservoirs for additional water. And as we go forward to this and we learn more, I'm very interested in looking at what are the potential groundwater aquifers in this region that we could use for storage, which ones have been contaminated, and I think that might be another way of looking at how to prioritize some of this pollution of these groundwater aquifers, because that is truly a public trust, is our groundwater aquifers, and I think that information might be helpful.
Well, Clay, you heard what Bob said. Obviously, we want to hear you talk future
From
meetings.
one rock star to another, Clay.
Yeah. Any further board discussion? Thank you very much for the hard work you and your group are doing, Clay. We're going to move to agenda item number 14. It's my understanding this is uncontested and that the individuals representing the city are here and want to make sure we do our business before they leave, and not to keep them here for a long time. This is a time and place for a hearing to consider revision of waste discharge requirements and master recycling permit for the city of Lothrop's treatment facility. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Since there is no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials and the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
No, Dr. Longley.
Thank you, Andrew. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No, Dr. Longley.
Thank you, sir. The hearing is now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to revise the WDRs and consider a master recycling program. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
John's moved and Carmen seconded. Roll call, please.
Mr. Costantino?
Aye.
Ms. Ramirez? Ms. Cordova? Mr. Schneider? Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. With that, we will go back to item 8 on the agenda. And Doug, why don't we take a 5-minute break? I think there's some people here that need a 5-minute break. Thank you.
traffic?
Not terrible. I think that the 9 o'clock start time makes it easier because I miss
The traffic.
everybody going to work at 8.
Yeah, okay.
So that's really nice.
So what are you, a 2-hour drive away?
I think it's about 2 hours and almost 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came in yesterday, met at 1 o'clock. And
To have your meeting.
yeah, our daughter is here in Sacramento, so we went out to eat with her. And by the time I got back to the room, I read a few of the emails and I said, no, just go to sleep. Just get some rest.
Yeah. Oh, good.
I went on and did that because last time I was so nervous I didn't go to sleep. I was awake at 4 and was like,
That was me too.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just so much information to take in, but it's I'm just you just don't want. I don't want to ask just dumb questions because there's so much I don't know, and I'm just having to get familiar.
You know what I've learned in my experience is that, because I kind of feel like that a little bit, but I realize that it's going to take me so long before I'm comfortable and I really know that this process is going to be so far along that by the time I feel like I'm knowledgeable enough to ask the questions, the process or the time for having shaped the policy has passed.
Yeah. Well, well, it's just taking.
Yeah.
It's just taking a little bit of time. Well, then you then you think about where you are and you hear the fracking and all that kind of stuff, and you know what I won't say know what the issues are. I don't know the technical issues, but I know it's posing a
Cultural
problem.
issues.
It's posing a problem with the water. So, and right now I'm working with a couple of different groups, so that's what I'll speak about when I do my little board report tomorrow, because there were some things I wanted to share about some of the things I'm working on, dealing with wildlife and how to do the balance, how to educate the youth, how to do the outreach, how to strike a balance with the industry and with.
Sure.
So.
I think that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Striking that balance is very hard.
I know it's really hard. It's like if you sway one way too far, you're.
But but both sides really need each other. And I remember from one of the first meetings that I went to was really contentious, and it was you had environmental justice there, and they were saying, look, we don't want you to shut down the farms. They're our friends. We work there. We need them, but we also need water.
Yeah.
And the growers felt similarly. They're like, look, we don't want to pollute the water. We like these people. We just need to find a way where we can both, work.
Well, my favorite one is the one that's going to be coming up with the mining. And as I start reading, it was like
the 101 miner.
When I started reading it, I couldn't just stop reading it because it's like, and then I started reading about the owner, and it's like, he's just really shut. It's like, okay, so this was a natural process, arsenic. It was a natural process, but that was when there were no people. That's when there was no earth. It's totally impacting, and there's got to be a balance there. So.
Right, diseases and the plagues are naturally occurring doesn't mean we just let it go and be like, hey, it was here. Go ahead and let it go, right? You gotta do what you can.
Yes.
That's right.
Strike that balance.
Strike that balance.
We're going longer than 5 minutes.
Huh?
I said we're going over 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the good things about having Carl as the chair.
Oh, he gives you a break. The other ones didn't.
Well, he's not very strict about time like that, and I am, and so I'm glad that he's
in charge. Well, we got to do elections after this, so you might get to be.
No, I was telling him, Carl, that one of the things I like about you is that you give us a range. Like, let's take a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
We don't have to stick to it. We can roll with whatever we need. So I like that about you.
Yeah. Okay, there he goes.
Let's come back into session once I can find 2 more board members. There's one. Where's John? There's John. Okay. So, agenda item number 8 is has to do with assigning priorities to the dairy program. And I flip enough pages here, I'll find the procedure. At this time, we will receive a report on assignment of priorities in the dairy program. This is an information item only. No action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Following the staff presentation, we'll hear testimony from dairy industry representatives and environmental justice representatives. Each will be given 5 minutes to address the board. Interested parties will then be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear the staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Doug Pattison. I'm a supervising engineer in the Fresno office and also the Central Valley Region Dairy Program Manager. I'd like to apologize up front. I've got some kind of cold or allergies or something going on. Although I think it's allergies, I feel good.
No apology for that. You live in the Central Valley where that's the rule of the day.
So I'll just ask you to bear with me. At the last meeting in December, I gave an update on dairy program activities, and at the conclusion of that, the board asked that I come back and update you on how we're considering disadvantaged communities in prioritizing dairy work. So I'm here to do that. This is an informational item, so no board action will be taken, but staff would appreciate any feedback or direction. In 2012, Governor Brown signed Senate Bill SB 685, which added a section to the Water Code to declare that it is the established policy of the state that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water, adequate for human consumption, cooking, and sanitary purposes. And this bill requires state agencies to consider this policy in establishing their own policies and regulations. Disadvantaged communities are particularly impacted by water shortages or contaminated water supplies and may not have access to safe, clean, and affordable and accessible water because of the very fact that they are economically disadvantaged. A disadvantaged community, which is typically abbreviated DAC, is a community with a median household income less than 80% of the statewide median. A disadvantaged unincorporated community, which is abbreviated DUC, is in any inhabited territory outside of a city's boundaries that meets the criteria of a disadvantaged community. And an inhabited territory is any place with 12 or more registered voters. So DUCs are a subset of DACs. But because, unfortunately, large parts of the Central Valley have median incomes less than the state, 80% of the statewide median, some DACs are encompassed by larger, some DUCs are encompassed by larger DACs, and therefore can get lost. These DUCs...
You got away from the mic.
Turned it off. Sorry. These DUCs are sometimes unidentified because many times the inhabited territory that comprises the DUC is not a census-designated place identified by the U.S. Census Bureau.
And to add some complexity, further complexity to that, these are not all rural. We find islands within the city of Sacramento, as an example,
Yes.
that fit this designation of DAC.
And I'm particularly focusing on DUCs in this presentation because they are generally the smallest and most vulnerable communities, such as farm labor camps or small unregulated housing developments, which often do not meet building code standards that sometimes appear in rural areas of a county or on the outskirts of a town or city. Most DACs, although disadvantaged, have a dense enough population to be in a better position to fix infrastructure problems, whereas DUCs are less dense and more scattered from each other and not able to benefit from any economy of scale or a broader tax base that can pay for fixes. Central Valley is home to approximately 1,400 dairies, and approximately 280 of those dairies are within 1.5 miles of a disadvantaged unincorporated community. There are two aspects of dairy activity prioritization as it relates to DUCs that I'd like to talk about. The first is how we pursue compliance and enforcement at dairies, and the second is when and how we will require implementation of improved management practices as they are identified by the Dairy Representative Monitoring Program. Regarding compliance, there are several things we evaluate, including whether the dairy has submitted a complete annual report, whether they have an adequate waste management plan, and whether or not they are applying manure and wastewater in accordance with a certified nutrient management plan. We conduct compliance evaluations primarily through inspections, but because of the sheer number of dairies, we cannot inspect every dairy every year. So we have a process to inspect dairies on a schedule. Our objective is to inspect dairies that have been certified by the California Dairy Quality Assurance Program at least once every 5 years. The Dairy Quality Assurance Program is a non-governmental organization that helps dairies comply with environmental regulations through education and outreach. It provides certification of environmental stewardship and compliance with environmental regulations through its on-farm evaluation program. If a dairy successfully completes the evaluation, it is certified for 5 years and therefore would be inspected at least once by Central Valley Water Board staff during that certification. All other dairies are inspected at least once every 3 years. We select which dairies to inspect each year by looking at how long it has been since the last inspection and whether there have been issues identified in past inspections. We also schedule follow-up inspections throughout the year for dairies that have been issued a notice of violation to confirm that they are back in compliance. And we inspect dairies when modifications are made, such as installation of a new lagoon or when a dairy closes. The number of dairy compliance inspections can vary up or down from year to year, depending on other workloads and priorities. However, we will take care to ensure dairies near disadvantaged communities or other sensitive receptors do not go more than the applicable 3 or 5 years as appropriate between inspections. And if violations are identified, those dairies may be inspected more frequently. We pursue enforcement at dairies for failures to comply with regulations by following the progressive enforcement process of the Water Board's enforcement policy. The goal of enforcement is to get the dairy into compliance as soon as possible and mitigate any damage caused by the violation. If an observed violation is correctable, we issue a notice of violation that gives the discharger a date by which to come into compliance and lists the potential penalties for non-compliance. If that is not successful, we initiate formal enforcement through the appropriate type of order, either an order under Water Code Section 13267 to gather information, a cleanup and abatement order to require investigation and mitigation of damage caused by a violation, or a cease and desist order, which is to formalize a time schedule in which the discharger must come into compliance. If compliance is still not achieved, the next step is the issuance of a civil liability complaint specifying monetary penalties and we could also refer cases to the Attorney General's office for prosecution through the judicial system. We consider several factors when determining when to step up enforcement. First is the effect on beneficial uses of water and whether the violation results in lasting effects on water quality. We also considered the effect on the integrity of the regulatory program. Highest priority is given to violations that threaten public health or where data are falsified. Penalties are calculated based on how culpable the discharger is and how intentional its actions were, whether the discharger took steps to abate the effects of the discharge and cooperated with staff requests, whether there is a history of violations, and what the harm to the environment from the violation was. One of the considerations affecting prioritization of formal enforcement will be the threat to nearby drinking water supplies, including DUCs. I want to stress that we will not hold dairies that happen to be close to a DUC to a higher standard than any other dairy. But if a dairy is violating regulations and it could potentially threaten people's health, then enforcement will be a priority. If there is evidence that dairy activities have contributed to exceedances of water quality objectives that impaired a disadvantaged community's supply well, we will work with the State Water Board's Office of Enforcement on a process to obtain replacement drinking water. In addition to compliance and enforcement, the other area of prioritization is regarding improved management practices. The Dairy General Order includes a time schedule for dairies to determine whether their management practices are protective of water quality. The Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program was formed to evaluate the effectiveness of management practices at represented dairies with a variety of site-specific conditions. The results of the Representative Monitoring Program's evaluation will be extrapolated to all its member dairies. So if a management practice is found not protective under conditions at a certain type of dairy, changes will be required at all similarly situated dairies. The time schedule currently specified in the Dairy General Order allows until 2019 for the Representative Monitoring Program to determine which management practices are protective at which types of dairies, and to recommend alternative management practices for those that are found to be not protective. But there are two areas for which it seems clear now that improvements will be needed. These are unlined dairy lagoons and nutrient management planning. The Representative Monitoring Program has found increased concentrations of nitrate in groundwater at monitored dairies with shallow groundwater near unlined lagoons and dairy cropland. It has also found that the monitoring associated with the nutrient management planning required by the Dairy General Order is not adequate to determine with sufficient accuracy how much nutrients are being applied to cropland. We may accelerate the time schedule for making improvements at particular dairies through issuance of a formal enforcement order, or we may implement more widespread changes by updating the time schedule in the Dairy General Order. We plan to begin requiring dairies to address these issues, starting with those posing the highest threat to groundwater, especially dairies with lagoons that have no separation between the bottom of the lagoon and groundwater, and dairies over shallow, high quality groundwater and permeable soils. Highest priority will be dairies that have those conditions and are near a DUC or other drinking water supply. I'd like to show you how we've begun to be able to consider DUCs in prioritizing our work. This is an image of a map showing DUCs in the southern San Joaquin Valley. We've also mapped the northern part of the region, and each blue circle is a DUC. And this is the same map with a layer showing dairy locations. This is a screen capture image of a GIS map, so it's not particularly high resolution here. but we can zoom in and see more detail and see exactly which dairies are near which DUCs. We plan to use these maps and the information embedded in them to address problems at dairies that pose the greatest risk to groundwater, particularly where it may have impacted or threatens to impact the drinking water supply of a disadvantaged community. To facilitate that, we're working on adding a layer to the GIS maps that includes regional groundwater quality information based on well data, including DUC wells. We're also considering the possibility of using cleanup and abatement account money to monitor drinking water wells at DUCs. This concept of using cleanup and abatement account money is being pilot tested by the Central Coast Water Board, working with the State Water Board, and if successful, we would like to expand it to the Central Valley. The Community Water Center recently received money through a supplemental environmental project, a SEP, to sample drinking water wells in disadvantaged areas, and we are looking to coordinate our efforts with them. We will continue meeting with community representatives, the dairy industry, and the representative monitoring program to find the most effective methods to implement the policy of SB 685 to protect the human right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water, which is in everyone's best interest, and to do this in a manner that will not put dairies out of business, which is also in everyone's best interest. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions by board members? Yes, John.
So Doug, on the determination of a DAC or DUC, is that a water board function, or is that something we're getting from the larger Cali PA effort?
Larger effort, Cali PA, and I think also Department of Water Resources through their integrated regional water management planning.
So does it matches up with the CalEnviro screen? Is that or not?
I believe it does.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I know that takes into account
DACs at least.
DACs. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And the DUC is strictly a median-based economic number.
It's median-based and being not incorporated, so being not within.
But not all the other factors that go into CalEnviro screen, being air quality and yes, you're green, or yes, it's not.
It does not take into account those other factors.
Okay.
John.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, and probably someday we need a discussion on CalEnviro screen. I've heard a lot of derogatory comments about its inadequacy when addressing disadvantaged or communities. I think testimony on that would be worthwhile. Yes, I'm sorry. Denise?
Yes. Doug, thank you for the report. And I'm glad to hear that the Community Water Center is going to get some funding to do some further study. I'm just wondering, you identifying this as a priority for the dairy program. Have you been able to identify yet any of the dairies that are within the 1.5 miles in the Central Valley that have some impact on the groundwater with the disadvantage and the unincorporated communities?
Not any direct evidence. Most of the evidence we have is from water supply wells that dairies sample. And some of those wells and some of the DUC wells have shown high nitrates, but we are not able to directly link those exceedances with a particular dairy.
Okay. Is that going to be a part of the study, possibly, that the Community Water Center might?
Well, I think that would be tough. I think that would really require installation of additional wells.
Okay.
But I think we are looking at working with the dairy industry in general and the State Water Board's process of maybe getting replacement water supplies for disadvantaged communities through a more cooperative method or voluntary method in lieu of enforcement, which we could pursue too.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bob?
I don't want to detract from the disadvantaged community issue here, but while we have some dairy folks, the tricolored blackbird was listed as a threatened species recently by California Department of Fish and Wildlife Commission, and they do a lot of nesting and acreages where some crops are grown by the dairy industry. And I just, I don't, and when I was talking earlier in an earlier issue about multimedia, this is one of those areas of multimedia. So our folks should just be aware that that's out there and that is an issue. And when the dairy, individual dairy folks that have these colonies of tricolored blackbirds can delay their cuttings, that can help that species. So thanks.
Thank you. Was not aware of that, but.
Any further comments by board members? Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
I have a card from J.P. Catavilla.
I don't have a lot to say, so I'm hoping I can maybe just take a quick minute, and then if I have anything additional to say, reserve that for later. First of all, everything that Doug presented today, I think, is a very wise and systematic approach to enforcement, and there's not really anything there that I would disagree with. We've been working with the Water Board for a long time to have a workable enforcement system that's helpful to our efforts. Without enforcement, we can't promote the stewardship that we're trying to promote. So we look forward to continuing to work. We also want the water issues in these disadvantaged communities to be solved, and we want to be part of the solution. That's why we're participating in the CV Salts process and have for a while, and have been working with the Water Board, State Water Board as well, to try to identify solutions to get folks to these waters, get water to these communities, while we're continuing to work on source control. You know, that's a big effort for us. We're doing a lot more than we've ever done before, and the monitoring program is identifying the information we need to go even further. So we'll continue on that. With regard to the tricolored blackbirds, which I wasn't expecting to come up today, but it is an interesting point because, you know, the dairies not only provide economic value to the valley, but all the feed that we grow actually helps support wildlife. And then we find that at certain times we have to, because some of these species are coming onto our dairies, we have to change our management at times to address that so that the fledglings can nest. And we actually just entered into a $1.1 million project with the Audubon, California, to up our game in this area as well, and to try to work with the farmers and the conservationists in the state collaboratively to improve the outcome. This issue doesn't happen on very many dairies every year. It's a small minority, but those birds tend to cluster in really small areas, and so when that does happen, there has to be a planned strategic response where, you know, we quickly act and protect the birds. So we're working on that as well. I'll reserve the rest of my time if I have any.
Thank you.
I brought that up because the nonprofit I volunteer with has a collaborative project on the Conway Ranch, and there's a 48-acre wetland there that's a primary tricolored blackbird habitat, and they move up from the San Joaquin to this pond. So you guys do a good job down there, please.
We're doing our best, and we're hoping to actually develop more off-dairy habitat and permanent habitat on or near dairies, so that they don't have to. The only place they have to go is our forage field. So.
Yes. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment on the gentleman that just spoke. Your statement, your statement was great, and I really appreciate hearing you say striking a balance, that the dairy is concerned, and your stewardship is working to improve the situation with the disadvantaged and unincorporated communities and improving the water quality, working with the staff. It's a good thing because the communities out there have no voice. So when the industry is working and the staff is working, then everybody's working for the best interests of the community. So I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Board Member Kadar.
With that, I have a card from Deanne Meyer, and she says, maybe. What does maybe mean, Deanne? Well, that's your decision. You gave us a card. Do you want to speak? I'm sorry? You're going to pass, okay. Laurel Firestone?
Thank you. Laurel Firestone from Community Water Center. We are really thankful for this board's leadership and follow-up from the last presentation that we made at the December meeting, and the staff's follow-up and commitment to this issue as well. And look forward to continuing to work with the staff and dairy industry and other partners to try to address this issue and really make some progress. I think we're really happy to hear how much the data and information around disadvantaged unincorporated communities has been integrated into the work of the Regional Water Board. We feel strongly that there's a need to have more proactive efforts on getting replacement water for communities that don't have access to safe drinking water, and where dairies are part of the mix of the sources of nitrate contamination, that they can be part, hopefully, of helping to ensure that communities have safe water. We also think there needs to be a strong proactive effort to ensure that vulnerable populations within those buffer zones have access to monitoring data about what's in their water. A lot of people on private wells or state smalls don't have regular information being sent to them about what's in their water, and may not know that they have to do the monitoring themselves, and also may not have the resources and access to labs to do that easily. And so we'll be talking in another agenda item about the SUP program that we're doing, which we're really thankful and excited about. But we also think that we're excited to hear that there's interest in looking at bringing more resources to do that more proactively. And again, I would also hope that the dairy industry is able to be supportive and help support that as well. And I think that I wanted to emphasize that we're happy that the board, that staff presented that they plan to be moving forward with requiring improved practices where representative monitoring or the information already being developed through implementation of the dairy program has shown that there really needs to be kind of no-brainer improvements in place, and that we don't need to wait until 2019 to start requiring things like finding out how much nutrients you're putting on, and starting to line lagoons that are completely unlined and within very vulnerable groundwater environments. These seem like things that we should have been requiring a long time ago, and we're really happy to hear that those will be moving forward, and that we're not waiting until the end of 2019 to do some of those things. And the last thing I would say is I'm really hopeful, I'm excited that some of the discussions we've been having with staff is to continue the dialogue, maybe look at having a more transparent tracking mechanism where we can see, okay, what are the disadvantaged communities and the dairies that are most at risk, or the communities that are most at risk from dairies, and that we can see how the various priorities and actions have actually been implemented over time. Because these are all really great commitments from the board, and I know there's limited resources and staff time, so I think if we now have sort of a list of the over 100 dairies within those buffer zones, and maybe the 65 that are also in high vulnerable groundwater environments, in addition to those buffer zones, and just start to look together with industry, with other folks and the board that are concerned, to just see how is this being implemented, and be able to troubleshoot and figure out how we can ensure that communities have access to safe drinking water, and where there's impacts and actions that need to be taken. So thank you.
Questions from board members? Yes.
I just want to say that I think that what you're saying is good, especially because, as we have seen historically, a lot of our, the partners, including dairy do take the right steps, and it is good for the public to be able to easily access and say, look, our partners are really doing a good job, so that the money that's invested maybe by dairy is recognized and that their efforts are recognized. And certainly, if they're one of in the minority that aren't performing, then that we can know that too. And I think that when you speak to transparency, that's certainly part of it. Something you said earlier is certainly relevant to where I live, and that is transparency as to constituents maybe in the greater area as far as water and people on private wells. I live out in the country, and my neighbors are really think, if there's a problem, someone will let me know. And that's the way a lot of people think. And really, that's not, even though the information's out there, people don't know how to get it and really rely on some state agency or municipality to give notice. So we want to make sure that people aren't lulled into a false sense of safety in their water. So I appreciate your comments.
Any further comments, board members? Yes, Bob.
I just wanted to thank staff for their presentation and the presenters here on moving this issue forward. Thank you.
And thank you, Laurel, for your presentation and for your strong leadership. With that, we will, JP, you put me in kind of a quandary when you said it. You were reserving time, and I've never heard anybody reserve time in front of this board before, so I was mulling it over. Obviously, if you have a minute or two you want to talk, but obviously if you talk, then I'll ask Laurel to come back up. So what do you want to do?
I think I'm gonna just let it go for today. There's many details that we could go into today.
Right,
and,
we could talk about this for a week. Yes.
Suffice it to say, we'll need to be working closely with the staff and the other stakeholders as this process goes forward. Thank you.
Appreciate it. I'll be prepared the next time somebody reserves time. Thank you.
Carl, if I could just make one of the tough things here is when you have these information items and it's not clear to the stakeholders who's going to be talking and what it's not really a public hearing but you talk about very important matters, so it gets a little confusing and that sort of thing. So to some degree we can deal with this with written comments and that kind of thing.
Good. Well, we would appreciate the written comments.
And Dr. Longley, I
Yes.
guess, you thanked Laurel Firestone for her leadership, and that's certainly evident, but I would certainly like to thank the dairy representative that's here, because, they're clearly at the forefront, and we appreciate your effort as well.
So for the rest of the meeting, it's 11:45 now, just about 11:45. We're going to take two other items this morning, 12 and 13. It's my understanding that they are going to be very short items. And then the board will break for lunch. And then we'll come back and do items 7, 10, and 11 this afternoon. So let's do the City of Jackson now. This item is now uncontested. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider adoption of time schedule order for the City of Jackson wastewater treatment plant. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence of testimony on this matter? Since there is no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed on the agenda materials in the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
No late revisions, Dr. Longley.
Thank you. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No legal issues, Dr. Longley.
Thank you very much. The hearing is now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to adopt the time schedule order. Denise moved. John seconded. Yep. Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Ramirez, Mr. Costantino, Ms. Cadara,
Yes.
Mr. Schneider, Dr. Longley.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is agenda item 13, small food processors, wineries, and related agriculture processes within the Central Valley. This is the time and place for hearing to consider resolutions approving a mitigated negative declaration and a conditional waiver of waste discharge requirements for small food processors, wineries, and related agricultural processes within the Central Valley. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on the matter? Since there is no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials and the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
Yes, Dr. Longley, there is one late revision in attachment A, deleting paragraph A2 that was inadvertently left in from a prior version, and it was just an error, so it just needs to be deleted.
Good. So that's being deleted. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No legal issues, Dr. Long. I would note that this is one of the projects where staff saw a need within the industry to expand the scope of a waiver. They did that, and that's one of the reasons why Ann Olson got the employee award this morning, developed their own CEQA documents, their own templates, and did that without, on their own. This is a board-initiated CEQA process that staff completely did just to address a need in the industry. Supposedly this waiver will cover an expansive set of facilities that could not be regulated under the prior order. So the board is being asked to approve both the CEQA document and a resolution approving the waiver.
Thank you. The hearing is now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to consider resolutions approving mitigated negative declaration and conditional waiver. Roll call, please. It does help. It does help. Does someone wish to make a motion? I mean, we talk about being fast, but that's a little too fast. Yes, John. Carmen?
I would make the motion that we approve the resolution regarding the mitigated negative declaration and the resolution, I don't remember the language.
Resolution approving the waiver and the resolution approving the mitigated negative declaration with the late revisions.
That's exactly what I want to do.
Say, yes, I understand. I've done that too. John, do you second that?
Second, yeah.
Very good, and recognize this is with a late revision. Now we can call the roll.
Mr. Schneider? Ms. Cordova?
Yes.
Mr. Costantino? Ms. Ramirez? Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
So, Carl, can I say one thing?
Sure.
Before lunch? This goes to JP's note. He's not here, but in looking through the three buff sheets for the the informational items, the oil field activities and the annual enforcement report lay out a little more detail than the dairy one, what we're going to talk about. And if you're a stakeholder in a process and you see the dairy item where it talks about prioritization of work, and it's real general, I could, you sort of get the worry that you don't really know what it's going about. And I would prefer either the enforcement one or the oil one, where it's got just a little more detail as to the breadth or the boundary of what the information. It doesn't limit us, especially if there's not a board action, but at least let stakeholders be on guard a little bit as to where what staff is headed. So that's just a note.
That should not be a problem.
Thank you. Very good. Well, then we're going to adjourn for lunch. Are we going to be talking about anything during lunch?
We are meeting in closed session. The board will meet to discuss initiated litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E. The two matters that will be discussed are litigation filed against the Central Valley Water Board. That's noted as A in the agenda, CSPA versus Central Valley Water Board. We will also be discussing litigation filed by the Central Valley Water Board. That would be item D, Central Valley Water Board versus 16-1 Mine, which is a different matter than the order that's being discussed later on today.
Thank you. With that said,
D as in dog for that.
We're recessed till 1 o'clock.